Right, well,
Well,
I'm John Atack. This is my lovely guest, Christian Jericho, my dear friend, Christian Jericho. And we're going to carry on talking about what we started talking about before, which is what Christian calls recycling, which is not putting things in the bin so that somebody will take it away. It means reusing or making use of the skills that you learned while a member of an extreme authoritarian sect.
yes.
I've memorized it now. So where would you like to be in? I know you've got a little picture that you've drawn for yourself.
I made a little picture for myself, yeah. I suppose what I want to do is to kind of roll back and make the observation that last time I was talking about just bits and pieces. So I was mainly talking about reclaiming skills. And that was supposed to go further. So reclaiming and recycling skills is only a part of recycling things like personal choice and self-discovery and all that kind of thing on the way to reclaiming one's autonomy.
Yep.
Trouble is, we kind of dug down deep into skills and we never went on to anything else.
So, well, the trouble is that whenever we start talking, I start rambling and divert the conversation somewhere else.
Well, we do tend to dig holes, John. That's what it is. We dig ourselves into a hole, which is fair enough.
Yeah.
So what I thought I would do is kind of unpack some of those other ideas that we never got to and see how the progression works for that.
Great.
To give the full picture, because to me, recycling is a much bigger thing, because it ultimately leads to the to arriving at autonomy, or what I prefer to call interdependence. But autonomy is a buzzword that people like, so we'll talk about autonomy.
Well, I'm not sure. Let's dig a hole there.
Let's dig a hole. Okay, let's dig a hole.
Autonomy, I think it's better to talk about interdependence, or because the only autonomous human beings are psychopaths. We don't go from dependence to independence to be utterly independent of other people. No man is an island, was it John Donne who said that? Somebody famous. That you know, to mature and become adult, we do become independent, but to be truly grown up, we become interdependent. So there's a difference between having emotional autonomy, where your emotions are not being controlled from the outside, and having autonomy, where you're not necessarily actually taking any notice of what's going on outside, you know, right, except when it's to your advantage. So, you know, I agree that word autonomy is a little iffy to me.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. So anyway, yes. And anyway, see, that ultimately is the end goal. And what I try to do with people is to bring a lot of different directions to bear on that one ultimate thing, because what has happened in pretty much every case that I have seen over all these years is that either a person is hijacked before they ever start developing it, if they're recruited in their teens or if they're born in to the group, they never get they never even see on the horizon that the goal is to become autonomous in this sense of being truly interdependent, where they have a strong sense of self, but also a strong sense of relationship.
Yeah.
Which to me is everything. And so they're never really sure what they're doing. They're busy feeling guilty every time they feel dependent because they feel weak. They're busy feeling guilty if they are independent, because every group talks about independent thinking, you know, and all of these things that the group uses to say you should be thinking what the leader tells you to think. So they're cornered into a corner of shame, where no matter what they're trying to do, they have no clear idea of how to do it in a healthy way. All they know is that when they were in the group, they were told they were wrong.
Yeah.
And so what I'm looking to do is to help people to say, I am able to do all this in my life, my way, the way I best understand it, and through that to make healthy, wholesome connections with other people to our mutual cooperation and benefit.
Mm.
And so, you know, that includes all sorts of things. And last time I talked about things like job-related skills, discovering that although the group encouraged you to learn things in order to make money for them or in order to recruit people for them, or sometimes both, those job skills can be repurposed.
Yeah.
To do what you want to do with them.
Mm.
Or they can be jettisoned, or they can be transformed. There's all sorts of things. And that includes things like communication skills, learning to be confident talking to other people, learning to see the point of talking to other people, rather than saying, oh, I've got to talk to this person because I've got to get them into our group, get them praying, get them meditating, get them exercise, whatever our group is doing, get them selling pots and pans. Instead of that, to be able to say, I can choose to talk to this person, and by which I'm offering them the choice to talk to me.
Yeah.
And if we agree, then we can do something mutually beneficial. And that was pretty much, if I recall correctly, that's pretty much where we left it last time, because we, you know, we did burrow deeply into that. But that's, to me, that's just one facet. And I see this whole area as being a number of different directions all coming together into this one point. So, for example, making choices, the freedom that we have to decide, what do I do with my time? I don't know how many times I've been told by people when they were in the group, they didn't have time for themselves.
Yeah.
Even if they were supposed to.
The control of time, I say this again and again, but Steve Hassan's BITE model could be control of behavior, information, time, and environment.
Yeah.
The T and the E could be switched over, because if you own all of somebody's time and you are in an environment controlled by you, then you're enslaved.
Yes. Well, I would go further than that and say that, I mean, if I have to give it in the form of a soundbite, I would say that time is the currency of being alive.
Yeah.
You know,
or as Artie Shaw said, time is all you've got.
And Artie Shaw, of course, is right.
Fantastic time, Artie Shaw. Yeah.
Yes, he did actually, didn't he?
Brilliant.
But you know, it's the currency of our relationship with people. How do you know that relationship is valuable? Because you invest time in it. How do you know that relationship isn't valuable? Because you don't put any time into it. You know, people talk about spending quality time back in the 80s. I remember this term quality time came up, which was supposed to mean that I'll spend 5 minutes with my kids or 10 minutes with my kids, and that's as good as if I actually spent real time doing something important to them, with them. I just don't believe in that. I don't see how you can have quality time that isn't also at some point quantity time. You know, it's like saying this 5p piece is worth as much as your pound or your 5 pounds. And I just don't buy that.
Yeah.
Time is how I express my priorities. It's how I express, ultimately, it's how I even express love.
Yeah. And it's how your children know that you love them.
Exactly.
Not
and it's how I know other people love me. So
that's why we talk every week.
Yes, well, exactly. And it's that use of time that when a person comes out of the group, there's still that little thing in their mind sometimes that says, I've got to make the most of my time in this way and in that way. And usually they've got a really clear idea of what way that is. And it usually has something to do with priorities that they learned in the group.
That may divert you slightly, because that's very much my own experience. I left Scientology over 36 years ago, but I still, and maybe it's Weber's Protestant work ethic as well, I still have this sense that if I can't staticize and quantify what I've used my time for, then it's not proper work. So to write, I have to read a lot. But reading's not proper work. You know, writing is, so how many pages I produce, something you can staticize, and it's still there all these years later. You know, I'm hoping that next year when I reach retirement age, I'll be able to say, no, I'm just going to stay in bed all day from now on.
Well, do keep in mind that it's Thursday at 2:00 tomorrow afternoon.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, thankfully I never had that, but, you know, and I did watch the terror that it brought up in people. And you're sort of going, it'll be the same next week.
Yeah,
It'll be the same every week for a billion years. You know?
exactly.
Very
And see, different groups do it in different ways. They may not talk about statistics and deadlines, but I can tell you how many times I've had somebody tell me that there was no time of any day that they could do something for pure pleasure.
yeah.
You know, the idea of sitting still and listening to a piece of music, or sitting still and watching a film, just for the sake of doing it, and not in order to tick off on the list, I've now done this thing that's for my own pleasure. Seriously,
done.
that is not an exaggeration. I have
Yeah.
countless times I've had people's, it was almost as if they were asking me to assign them pleasure.
Yeah.
And of course, assigning somebody anything is not going to happen with me. But they, you know, they almost would have liked it if I would have said, right, now you've got to do this, you know, and I will make the suggestion. I will say, why don't you try doing this as an experiment? Just do that. Just experiment with, drawing something, making little cartoons, or why don't you just try sitting down with your harmonica or your guitar or your fiddle or whatever instrument they play. Just play something for the sheer joy of playing it. Just see what happens.
Yeah.
That's as far as I'll go, because I know what the next step is. As you know, what I'd like you to do is 8 o'clock tomorrow morning and every morning thereafter. And they might feel more comfortable, but that doesn't get them to the place of regaining choice, recycling this power that they have over their own life to say, I will do what I want with my time, my money, my future, my exercise, my whatever it is that they count as something of theirs that they've been giving away all this time.
Which we see with mindfulness, you know, the idea that you're going to be mindful for a certain amount of time, and that, you know, my understanding of the Buddhist, the purpose of meditation is to achieve one-pointedness of mind, to be able to absolutely focus on the moment and what is going on, which can be very useful, particularly if you're using power tools. But otherwise, you know, always pushing yourself into this space in the present and not sitting back and relaxing, you know, that the whole joy of life just evaporates. You know, it becomes a discipline to live life rather than what life probably really is, you know, whatever that might be.
Whatever that might be, yes. So, you know, that's the kind of thing I look for, people expressing preferences of one thing over the other, of being able to say, rather than, well, whatever you say or whatever you do or whatever this person or that person says or does, I just have to accept it.
Yeah.
Because there is that tendency as well in some kinds of movements and some kinds of groups to say, well, I have no power of choice. And I have on occasions put people in a situation where I've just taken them literally at their word when they've said, well, anything's okay. And I've just given them anything, all the possible options at once, because it was the only way I could communicate this idea that if you say anything, then I'm going to ask you to think about what anything means. And in that beautiful moment when they look and they say, actually, I don't want anything. I do care whether I drink grape juice or orange juice or apple juice or prune juice, and I certainly don't want them all in a glass together, which I have done to someone on occasion.
It doesn't surprise me at all.
No, but you know, it was, and the thing is, I made it for myself. I actually quite liked the mixture.
Well,
they didn't like the look of it because it's
Here's a glass of anything.
You shut your eyes to drink that one, you know, if you're squeamish. But if it will help someone to realize that from now on, you're not under the leader's control and domination, and you have the choice. It's a free choice. You can do it, and it's no one's right to take it away from you.
Yeah.
If I can do that with someone, then that feeds into another thing I look for, which is self-discovery. The two go together. It seems to me that you can't have one without the other. So when a person discovers, gosh, I never knew I liked jazz, or I just found out I enjoy symphonies, or I just found out I like rock and roll, or whatever it might be. You know,
As
there are
long as
groups
it's
of
not, as long as
bands.
it's not cowboy music, eh, Christian?
Well, yeah, all right. Uh, I do have to draw the line. As long as they don't play it for me. The thing is, if they don't play it at me, that's fine. It's just that they come in with,
I know not to play my cowboy music when you're here, you know.
well, there you go, you see. As long as they don't walk in with a boombox on their shoulder playing Tex Ritter or something like that, I'm fine.
Divorce me, COD. Sorry.
Yes. But that rediscovery, that sense of finding out, I've listened to these different kinds of music, and I've discovered I have preferences. I have tastes.
Yeah.
Certain things amuse me, certain things don't. I do like video games, or I don't like video games, or I like sunbathing, or can't stand sunbathing. Just finding out they like certain kinds of literature. In the group, they never had time to read just for the sake of reading and
There's a
having a
great,
story wash over them.
the late, great Carolina Hearn, who was in the Fast show. One of the characters she did was that she and her husband would be sitting on a train or a plane or something, and she'd be boring a stranger to death, explaining what they'd done. And she would come to the punchline was always, so I said, and she then, so I said, what about having chips? What did I say, Roy? And he has to say, you said, I'd like to have some chips or what have you. And he has to repeat. And every time he fails to repeat exactly what she said, she hits him or tells him off. And it's so, you know, it's so much this thing of somebody or something on the outside providing you with the matter to think about.
Yeah.
And the release, I suppose I didn't get it when I was a teenager because that was my life. You know, it was a life of discovery and revelation for me. And I didn't realize that for most people, it isn't. For most people, you know, they're standing in front of the picture in the gallery and they're having somebody explain to them why they ought to like it.
Yeah.
Rather than Paul Clay's injunction about painting, which is that the only thing you need to understand a painting is a chair, because otherwise you'll get very tired.
Yes.
And that's my whole view of art. You know, if you sit and look at it for long enough, you'll work out whether you can stand Jeff Koons or not. You know, and it didn't take me very long, I must say. But or Damien Hirst or Tracy Emin or whoever.
Exactly. And this, you know, the thing is, once you start asking the question, what do I really like? You then start discovering which things do I like more, which things do I like less, and eventually what things really matter to me. And eventually that takes you on to what are my priorities in life? Now, for some people, it's easy. They come out of the group, easier. They come out of the group and they start remembering their old priorities. And sometimes they say, actually, I still like that. That still means something to me. Or, well, you know, that's not as important as it was. I
don't want to listen to sugar anymore, you know.
Well, you know, I've done that now, and I can just, you know, I can shrug that off and say, right, been there, done that, and I'm looking for a new priority. But the fact is that once we encounter our choices, once we encounter ourselves in that way of saying, what things matter to me most, that's when we can start saying, what do I really care about? And how do those things I care about define me?
Yeah. And
that self-discovery, then I try to bring it to a sense of awareness, so that people are saying, not what is the world according to the narrow focus of my group or my leader or his rantings and ravings about how the world is going to end, or how the virus is just going to go magically poof, one day and be gone, like it's a miracle. But what is the world really? And that awareness, once we can become aware of ourselves, we feel freer to become aware of the outside world, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So again, it's not that these things are steps we go through so much as different aspects of the same process, this sense of waking up from other people's dreams.
Yeah. Waking up from other people's dreams. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I look at it. To me, being in an abusive sect where the authority figure is telling you how to see everything and how to think everything, I think of that as being in someone else's dream.
Yeah. I think
And
that's very true. I mean, we've talked about the theatre of the mind, the theatre of consciousness before, and it is that I think it was Kant who I've never read, who said that Immanuel Kant was an old pissant, to quote Monty Python, who said that there is the universe around us, but each of us, through our interaction with the universe, through our own minds, we all create a universe.
yeah.
And that kind of comes apart when it's somebody else who's creating that for you. Now, we're going to take in the experiences from somebody. You're going to listen to Beethoven's Fifth or The Rite of Spring or Helter Skelter by the Beatles or whatever, and have a resonance with that. But it's where that is a genuine feeling rather than something that's the leader. Charlie Manson says Helter Skelter means this, and we've got to do this, or where the music actually resonates within you rather than it being something, as you say, where you've got to tick a box or say, I did that. I think so much of I'm hugely involved with reading Eric Fromm at the moment. As you know, I've read 4 of his books this year, and I first encountered him decades ago, but I didn't really get how important what he was saying was. And in the first book he published, Escape from Freedom, in 1941, which made him famous straight away, he talks about the pseudo-self, and he says that he's alarmed that industrial culture, and he escaped from Nazi Germany in 1934, that industrial culture means that people are ever more looking to others to say, how should I behave? What is my status? And he called this the pseudo-self, that no self is actually created. And I think it's often the case that, as you said before, that when somebody joins a group, they haven't formed a complete self. And the self is sacrificed to the group. And the group will say, oh, you have to destroy your ego. And of course, people don't look the word ego up in the dictionary. It means self. You have to destroy yourself. Well, you have to overcome your selfishness. That might be a decent goal. But to actually destroy yourself, to just become a puppet, a creature that responds according to, the provocation from the outside, it's a dreadful thing. And, it's a matter of how much that has happened. And as you say, the sense of liberation. I had an experience which I've many times alluded to. I was a teenager and I used to live in Lichfield, which is right in the centre of England, and it's an old place. It goes back before the Roman invasion, and it has a Gothic cathedral. And I was sat by a reservoir, and the sun was going down, and the 3 spires, and it is the only 3-spired cathedral in Britain, the 3 spires of the cathedral were reflected on the water, and I just had to sit down and look at this. It was just so glorious. And a chap walked by with his dog, and he stopped. And he said, oh, that would make a lovely postcard. And he walked on. And it's the whole kind of Kodak moment of, I'm not actually going to experience things until I get home and look at the photographs I've taken of them, which is, possibly not the best way to live. Though it is a good idea to take some photographs. No.
Part of being aware, or becoming aware to me as well, is becoming aware of ourselves in ways that defy the way the sect and the leader defined us. So instead of letting the leader mirror back at me what the leader thinks I should be, learning to look at the world around me and the people that I form healthy relationships with, and letting them become my mirrors.
Yes.
Because another idea that I carry around in my mind and tend to apply to this whole thing is that it's our relationships that serve as mirrors for ourselves. So if I'm in a relationship with a destructive person, it's like standing in front of a funhouse mirror and saying, oh, that must be what I look like. Well, the only thing a destructive person is going to reflect back to me is something destructive that he or she thinks will be useful to control me and harm me.
Yeah.
So that destructive relationship is a poor mirror.
Yeah.
When I'm in an extremist authoritarian sect, I am surrounded by circumstances and people in relationship with me that are, in some sense, destructive and in some sense are undermining me.
Mm.
So that I don't really know who I am
Mm.
when I'm in relationship with a destructive person. When I come out, part of awareness means that I'm moving away from that picture and I'm forming healthy relationships. And those people and those circumstances are giving me a sense of who I am in truth. I'm starting to see myself as I really am.
Yeah.
And so for me, recovery and recycling in recovery is taking back the right to decide who determines what I'm really like.
Mm.
A healthy relationship. I will choose healthy relationships now because that will tell me more about myself than being in relationship with this destructive, crazy, narcissistic person.
Mm.
And, you know, and that then that works together with the idea of answering the big questions in my life.
Yeah.
Because then I need to ask myself, or I want to ask myself, what do I really stand for?
Mm.
What would I like to look back on at the end of my life and see? What do I mean? And what does my life mean?
Mm.
I've met so many people come out of groups, and this has been the question on their mind. They thought they were going to answer it in their group because so many of the people, I would say almost all the people that have come to me over the years, there's an aspect of idealism to them.
Mm.
And their idealism has been kidnapped, taken prisoner, and distorted and twisted and turned into something that served the leader instead of serving the person. So that their idealism was so polluted by the leader's teaching, by the leader's personality, that they no longer knew what they stood for.
Yeah.
Even in the group, they only stood for whatever the leader said they were doing today.
Yeah.
You know, he could say today, well, we're wearing orange to reflect the rising of the sun, and tomorrow he could say we're wearing orange to reflect the setting of the sun, and I'm just going to go, yeah, well, that's what I'm doing now.
And he could change his name from Bhagwan, the supreme god, to Osho the Buddha at a moment's notice.
At a moment's notice, and now that's who he is. And in between there, he could call himself Zorba, the Buddha.
Yeah, and could also say to people, I never said that about things that are on record. You know, it gets very confusing.
Yeah. And if I'm going to be faithful in following him, I have to take what he's saying as absolute truth. And I mustn't contradict. I mustn't ask questions. I mustn't say, well, you just said this. How do you justify it? Because he doesn't have to justify himself to me.
You must accept ideology over experience, as doctrine over person, as Robert J. Lifton puts it.
Exactly. And so what I'm looking for here is to encourage the person to be willing to say, right, now that I don't have a leader dictating my purpose, dictating my goals, and polluting my idealism, what is there about me? What really matters to me?
Mm.
That I'm willing to say, that's what I'm going to do with my life, and that's what I'll be able to look back on and say, that is what I did. That's what counts.
Yeah.
That's how I'd like to be remembered.
Mm.
And then I can ask myself, well, is there a career that I need to engage in? Or is there some other skills I need to learn? I can start asking, what steps do I need to take to become that person that I want to be?
Yeah.
Because now that I don't have a master or a guru telling me what I should be, I can choose that for myself.
Mm.
And that may mean I need to work at some steps to do that. Maybe I want to become a doctor. Well, there are steps involved in becoming a doctor. Maybe I want to be a physical trainer. There are steps involved. Maybe I want to be a teacher. There are steps involved.
Yeah.
But I get to choose that.
Mm.
Those are my goals now. And that takes me naturally to saying, well, what other things am I interested in?
Mm.
Maybe some of the things that matter to me, they're not really a career, or they're not like a full-time devotional action of my life or something, but but they're still important. And I can have hobbies. It's allowed now.
Yeah.
I'm allowed to have hobbies.
Mm.
Some people really struggle with the idea
Mm.
of just having a hobby, or um, becoming amateurs, well-skilled amateurs at something that they do just because they care about it.
And then you see the joy that they gain from doing it. You know, they go and join the local choir or what have you, and it's their sense of community or the sense of relationship, or if it's stamp collecting or something like this.
Yeah.
There's a joy involved in it that belongs to you. It's also, we
Yeah,
know
go ahead.
several people who've, you know, come out of a group. I was talking to Frances Peters today,
Yeah.
and she was, I think, 44 and had spent her whole life, well, from being about 1 year old, in the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, the Jehovah's Witnesses. And she left. She had some very confusing years finding out who she was. And she then trained up and became a counsellor. Julie Jenkinson also had a long period in an abusive group. And then, you know, she now has a PhD and runs Hope Valley Counselling.
Yeah.
So it's possible to create a career after the middle of life and go in that direction, and in the case of Julie and Frances, do a great deal of good for the
Yeah.
world and the people in it.
A lot of people, I've been surprised at how much joy, as you say, how much joy people experience. I know the word passions is one of the trendy words nowadays. People find their passion. Maybe that word will fade in time. I don't care. It's as good as any other word. I like the word joy. That thing that you do, and it doesn't have to pay. It doesn't have to win you fame and fortune. It doesn't have to do anything else, because the fact that you do it brings you joy, brings you a sense of fulfillment. It arouses your fascination. It gives you a sense of it gives you that sense that you think you hear, at least that I think I hear when I hear a bird singing just for the sake of singing, you know, or when you see a child play, and that child isn't doing anything else in the world but playing. That's all the child's doing. You couldn't offer that child money and get any more joy out of that child than just the fact that they're playing.
And to, you know, see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower. There's that wonderful minute or two in the film American Beauty where the young lad has filmed a carrier bag, a plastic bag, just floating as if dancing in the breeze.
Yeah.
And this is his moment of revelation. This is his insight into the world, and that the world is a joyful place that is speaking to him, if he can just, you know, taste and see, as the poet put it.
Yes.
And it
So,
is easy to become caught up in the world and no longer be really experiencing it.
yeah. So those are the kinds of things, you know, beyond recycling skills, which can sound an awful lot like drudgery to some people. Recycling to me is so much more, because it's rediscovery, and it's reawakening, and it's revivifying. All of a sudden discovering that being alive isn't this dragging through each day, trying to make sure you're doing your duty and making this person happy who can't be made happy, because every time you get to where you think he wants you somewhere else.
Yeah.
And that inevitably then takes me to the question of the big purpose, the ideals that once drove you, or that once attracted you, or that once made you dream. And I come back to that, even though I've already talked about that, because one of the things that happens to us when we've been in an abusive group is that our ideals, part of the corruption of our ideals, however else they're corrupted, is that they're turned into perfectionism. And of course, you can never be perfect. So you're always frustrated, you're always shamed by your very desire to do something good in the world. And I see it all the time in people. They feel that unless they perfectly achieve their whatever it is, there's this voice in their head that's saying, you're not good enough, you're terrible, and I don't even know why you're my disciple. It's that sometimes it is quite literally the hangover of the leader's voice in their head that says, you're just a terrible person because you're not perfect. You say, here's one, you say you want to do the right thing, but look at how lazy and useless you are at trying to do it.
Yeah, you only got 99% of the questions right. You failed.
Yeah, exactly. And so getting people to address this idea that their ideals are still intact because their ideals were put on hold. It was like a magic trick. Their ideals were used to attract them. And then when they weren't looking, they were swapped out and they were given this perfectionism, this impossible achievement to please the leader. And then they were beaten with their failures and humiliated with their failures. And to be able to say, well, the leader's not here to humiliate you anymore, and you don't have to shame yourself either. Because I think of one of my heroes in life, who is Martin Luther King. He didn't achieve everything he wanted. Our country is still torn by racism, but it's not torn by racism now the way it was torn by racism in the 1950s. He may not have achieved everything that he'd hoped for. It'll be his grandchildren or his great-grandchildren rather than his children who will see the world that he dreamt of. Yeah,
who may be judged by the content of their character instead of the color of their skin.
Yeah.
One really hopes so. And, it's curious, as an aside, we've been watching O.J. Simpson, Made in America. I didn't realize it was 6 hours long when I started. But we got to the end, nearly. I think we got 30 minutes left. And it's very well made because you see, that he became a celebrity and transcended his blackness. And he liked to be a celebrity and didn't care about, he wasn't like, so Harry Belafonte or Nina Simone, people who risked everything to support the cause. He was a very shallow, narcissistic individual. And he got away with murder. Simply, apparently, by not taking his arthritis medicine for 2 weeks, so that when he put the gloves on in court, they wouldn't fit, which one of his friends said.
I can't possibly comment.
Yeah, his friend said, I told him, just don't take your arthritis medicine for 2 weeks. And it's like, okay.
I couldn't possibly comment.
But you see, what happened in South Central, what happened in Watts, the terrible in Compton, the terrible oppression and the, and we're still there. We still need Black Lives Matter. We still need to say, this is wrong. What we're seeing with COVID-19, the terrible, the huge amount of Black people, the statistically disproportionate amount of Black people who are dying from this condition because of the social defects that still exist. But as you say, if you track it back to MLK's time, and then you track it back to 1863 and Lincoln's manumission of the slaves, things have changed.
Things have changed.
For a time when we have equality, for a time when people are judged indeed by the content of their character rather than anything else, how much money they were born with or anything else. But we are headed that way. And he sacrificed his life to achieve that.
Yeah. And you see, whereas it would be easy to look and say, well, he failed because he didn't get everything that he was working for. I would say he succeeded because he moved forward and he inspired a lot of people to keep trying after he's gone.
Yeah. And you can sit wherever you like in the bus now.
Yeah. Well, but more than that, there is a whole train of people who, because he did what he did, we're still saying we can do better, we can do better, we can do better, we can do better.
Yeah.
And it's not a failure if you did what you could.
Mm.
It's not a failure to not do what you couldn't.
Mm. No,
And the
no.
rediscovery of that, when you come out of a group that tells you you have to be perfect or you're nothing, to come out and say, I did what I could and I didn't do what I can't.
Yeah.
But what I could do counted for something, is a big step forward for people.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand that the way I feel about it is we're all threads in a tapestry. And
yes,
every one of us is responsible, and every one of us is in some way connected to the whole tapestry. And it really does matter. Everybody's life matters. And whatever our contribution is, yes, time will keep moving forward. Hopefully, the human race will grow up eventually. You know, it's not impossible. Hopefully, we'll enter adulthood and people will start caring for other people. Again, Eric Fromm gives a definition of love in The Art of Loving, where he says that love is union and separation. Love is where you are in a relationship of complete union with your friend, with your wife, spouse, with your God, with whatever the place of love is, that you are united, but you are also still completely yourself.
yes.
You know, you haven't been taken over.
And here we're back to interdependence.
Yeah.
We're right back there. There's this idea that we are interconnected and interdependent, and we talk about Martin Luther King, but there were a whole host of other people who were there with him.
Oh yes, and several of whom lost their lives too.
Exactly.
I was trying to think of the guy who worked with him, who was shot several years before him.
Oh, Medgar Evers?
Medgar Evers, that's it, exactly right.
Yeah.
And, you know, people talk now more about Nelson Mandela than they do about Stephen Biko or the other 37 blacks who were killed in custody. And it's a bit of a shift, you know, this hero worshipping idea, rather than seeing the group of people and, you know, the most charismatic among them, like Mandela and King. But there are also people who gave everything. Rosa Parks is quite important to that story as well.
Absolutely.
People who just said, you know, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Yes.
You know,
So this all feeds into this, and all of these other things then feed into the rediscovery of our authentic self.
Yeah.
Who am I really when I'm who am I really when I'm sitting alone in a room? There's nobody out there to impress. There's nobody out there to mollify. There's nobody out there to please. It's just me alone in a room. Who am I? You never get to ask that question, let alone answer it, when you're under the authority of an extremist group, because the leader never wants you to look at that question. He wants to define you, or she wants to define you.
Yeah.
And so all of this process of recycling is finding the bits and pieces of our lives that have been damaged, polluted, scattered, reclaiming them all and saying, how can I find who I am in the midst of the mess that was made? And discovering that it's not a hopeless process. It's actually a very hopeful process. And that is what then takes us into this area of true interdependence, what people want to call autonomy, which really isn't. We go beyond being the individual to being a person and in relationship, and finding our wholesomeness again, finding our sense of adequacy and wholesomeness, and the relief of the burden of trying to do the impossible for the unpleasable leader, the implacable leader. So for me, that's the overall, the big picture of recycling or reclamation or whatever you want to call it. I think of recycling because I've got a paper towel here. This paper towel, according to the packaging on it, this paper towel is completely recycled paper. It was something else. I don't know what else it was, but it was something else.
It was a giraffe.
Maybe, I don't know.
A
But
wildebeest, possibly.
it was some other kind of paper which they reclaimed, they recycled, they made it into something else, and I was able to use it to clean an ink spill quite successfully. And so it's done its job, which means that it's been papered twice, and probably will be paper a third time, and that's okay. And
yeah, I mean, we've got reuse, reduce, recycle. You know, there are three aspects to this process, two of which have been forgotten in the kind of it really we shift over to the contemporary use of this word recycling, which means I don't have to feel guilty because I take my bottles to the bottle bank, and it's not quite enough. But to then shift that over to the sense of, you know, moving away from perhaps paper to glass, and we can have scissors and rock later on.
Okay.
By recycling glass, you have a material that can be used again and again and again and again. And there's, you know, we can stretch the metaphor, an absolute metaphor, as the people in general semantics call it, with the idea that, you know, the glass is a useful product which could be housing better things than Coca-Cola, possibly, or Pepsi-Cola. I don't want to make any...
Other colas are available, yes.
I can't remember which of the Himalayan states it was that banned Coca-Cola because the only thing that was good for you in it was the water. And so they didn't need it, you know. And that's so true. I mean, the amount of damage that these sugary drinks have caused in the last, century and 130 years or so since they emerged on the scene as, what was it, Coca-Cola was... didn't actually have cocaine in, that's true, but it was made from coca leaves, which do have cocaine in, until 1903. And it was sold as a brain tonic, wasn't it, originally, that it would pep you up and make you think faster. So it was a pharmacist's invention. It was as was Pepsi-Cola, which comes from pepsia, dyspepsia. That was meant to heal your digestion, and on we went with these strange ideas. And the best thing is to recycle them by, I don't know, not buying them in the first place. Reduce, reuse.
Well, yeah, I don't like... I'm not trying to make this metaphor walk on all fours.
No, of course not. I'm lampooning that aspect of it.
Yes.
To say that's not what we're talking about at all. We're talking about finding out that you actually do have some useful material that you thought was waste, that you know, was extraneous, that is actually, you can do something with it. You know, you can unpick that sweater and use the wool to make some nice gloves or something, but you can do something else with it from something that, in fact, you may have believed was a terrible and oppressive thing. You can find joy and you can find hope from that material. You have the materials there through skills and through experience, which is, you know, the profound aspect of being human. It fascinated me as a teenager that people talked about nature and nurture, and it was nature and nurture. And it always seemed to me that there was a third point which was created possibly by nature and nurture, which I call the self, and that things we're not just little robots running around on a track. We can actually think. You know, I was asked many years ago in a documentary whether I believed that we had free will, and I hadn't really thought about it. And I said, I don't think if we're born with free will, I think was the question. I said, I don't think we're born with free will, but I think we possibly can get it. And I think that's what we're talking about here. Free will would be, or will, well, it's going to be free just by the nature of being will. But will is something that we can develop, that we can say, this is what I like, this is what I prefer, this is what I think, and not feel that we have to engage in a battle with somebody, you know, who they say, you know, well, marshmallows are horrible and I don't know why you like them. That we all have our own tastes, and that's a very physiological thing also, that we all have, you know, different taste buds, a sensation of bitter, sour, sweet, salt, and umami, which used to be called savory when I was a child, but it's now called umami, which is a great word, that we all experience these things differently. And for some people, really hot chili is a quite delightful thing. For others of us, we like medium hot chili. And for some people, it's a horrible thing. And to try and, that is the where the leadership says, well, no, you've got to eat these, jalapenos. They're the only kind of chilies. And the preferences and tastes and desires of the leader, which are usually pretty weird, when you get close to any of these people, and often include large amounts of drugs. When you look at Rajneesh or Ron Hubbard, that they, their preferences and tastes were for things which were probably not very good for them. Yeah. But to discover that you don't actually think that, the color red must be avoided, or must be the only color you wear, or the delight of finding that you are yourself, and that nobody can know more about you than you do, because you're inside there. So as a kid, I'd go to the doctor, and the doctor would always say, "What seems to be the trouble?" And that word "seems" always got me. It's sort of, and they then grab together a few symptoms and say, "Well, that's what's wrong with you, and so you have to do this." But what's wrong and what's right is so much more elaborate than what can be seen from the outside. And we, each of us, we are the product of our own artistry. And whether willing or unwilling, we are the product of our own artistry. And as you say, to think that when I get to the end of this journey, which is this life, this me, this self, what will I have contributed? And what are the important things? How big will my carbon footprint have been? Is that fantastically important? Well, it has some importance to me. What will I have contributed to society? As I think it was Erik Erikson who put forward the idea that there were 5 forms of immortality. There was potentially spiritual immortality. Then there was making monuments. There was developing ideas. One of them, the last one is the chemicals that will persist. Oh, and the other one's children, of course. But yes, of course. These are the forms of immortality. And having put aside any concern about eternal life for myself, I am concerned my children should be able to take from me something into the future that is useful to them and hopefully to other people. They certainly won't spend their lives fighting against terrible cult groups, I hope, So, I'll have taught them that at least. And that I'll have hopefully made some art of some kind. I'll have said some things. I'll have helped some people. Best of all, though, that when I'm gone, somebody will sit down and think of me, say the way that I think of my own mum. That, she lived to be 94, you knew her well, and she was a delightful person. And I had the pleasure and the privilege through the last 17 years of much of it living in the same house, but otherwise living in the same village, the last 5 years looking after her. And that when I think about her, I'm happy. When I think about her life, it makes me smile. I think about the silly things she did, like when she came to me one day with her false teeth and the plate had cracked, and she asked if she could sellotape them back together. And I said, no. And 5 minutes later, I was having to get them out of her throat because she did what she thought was the right thing, no matter what you thought. She was a delightful person. And that's all I want, that people go, oh yeah, he told me this joke once and it was quite funny, I can't remember it, but it was quite funny. That the memory of Jon will be a pleasant thing to people. It won't, they won't think of me the way they think of, Ron Hubbard or as somebody who blighted their life. Hopefully, I hope nobody. Now, there might be 1 or 2 people who do feel that, actually, and I'm very sorry. Let me just say that now. I think you possibly read me the wrong way around. I don't know. So, yeah, what does my life add up to? And that's the meaning of life. though the Monty Python film is very close to explaining the meaning of life, that what did my life mean? What does it mean to others? And you talked about the reflection of the self and how we're mirrored, which Irving Goffman, The Self in Public, in the 1950s, was talking about this idea. But I think he came to the conclusion that that's pretty much all you are, just what's reflected onto other people. And it is true that if we surround ourselves with people who are hostile and unpleasant, that they will reflect that back to us, that they will reflect their needs, their narcissistic desires, and project, what's wrong with them onto us. If we have the good fortune, as I have, to know people who are kind-hearted and considerate and concerned, such as yourself, then what is reflected back to us is something positive, and it's something out of which we can learn and grow, and something out of which we can hopefully learn some humility, which I think is a quite important aspect of being human, because we can't really understand anything as long as we have to defend ourselves, from the world and assert our rectitude and our correctness in all things. That there's a process of growth there, and that process of growth is the proper concern, I think, for any human being. But it becomes a necessity for somebody who's been through has lived through authoritarian abuse.
Absolutely. And of course, that process, or that ongoing process, it doesn't end. I don't see that. I can't imagine that I could ever hope to take people to the end of the process of reclaiming and recycling, because it goes on forever.
Yeah, and it's the journey that you have to take. They have to take the journey on and the responsibility for the journey, and otherwise we failed.
Exactly. If anybody needs me to do any of this, then I'm not doing something right.
Mm. Yeah.
At least that's how I look at it. I'm not doing what they need, because I should be making it possible for them to say, right, now I know I've got a direction. Now I know where I can take this, and it's my pleasure in life to keep discovering myself and to keep growing into myself. For me, the idea of recycling is that, I suppose I could even call it repair in some sense. I don't really care about the words that much, because until fairly recently, I wasn't really bothered about trying to explain it to anybody else in any formal way.
No.
But to me, the idea is that someone has come into their lives and vandalized their lives. And now what we're trying to do is to take all of that and restore it to what it could have been and to what it still can be.
Yeah.
And recycling seems to make sense, because people understand, or think they understand, that recycling is a way to take what used to be rubbish and turning it into something worth having.
Yeah.
So that works for me right for now. I don't know. So maybe the metaphor is tripping us up unnecessarily here, but I know you know what I'm talking about. It's just when we start putting words to it, it gets unnecessarily complicated, perhaps.
No, I thought I might as well lampoon the idea before anybody else did,
Oh yeah, well, why not? There is another distinction I need to make.
Yeah.
And that is that saying that X has a purpose is not the same thing as saying X can be made to serve a purpose.
Yes.
Just because the leader of my group made me learn to, made me learn to stand on street corners and busk for money and hand out leaflets. That's not necessarily the purpose of the skills that I had to learn in order to do that. That was the leader's purpose.
Yeah.
And if I can take back from the leader this idea that X has a purpose because that's the leader's purpose, well, if I've learned how to play guitar, and if I've learned how to talk to people, look them in the eye and say, would you like to read this? That might be useful in other ways. Maybe I can do something else more useful with that. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I can learn to teach, or maybe I can learn to entertain, or maybe I can learn to do something else, depending on the rest of my personality and the rest of who I discover myself to be. And so in that case, I'm not looking at X fulfilling the purpose of the leader, but now I'm looking at it and saying, how can I make these things, which I had to learn in the group, how can I make them serve me instead of the leader? So I do want to separate out those two ideas. Whatever this thing is that I learned in the group, it doesn't have to serve the leader anymore. It's come with me, and it's mine. Yeah. And I can make it serve my understanding of who I am.
Yeah, and in part, there's a relationship that I think we all recognize, which is that we allow parental authority to a leader, and that usually means that we are reduced to childhood and childlike obedience, and that it's a natural part of life. As I say, my parents are gone. My mum for 9 years now, my dad for 25. It'll be 26 this year, actually, next month. And that meant that I had to become my own parent. And I really did accept that. In fact, in my mum's last years, I had to be pretty much, I had to stop her from sellotaping her false teeth back together. So I had to take on a sort of parental role. But to accept that in yourself, I'm now my own parent, which means I decide what I do. You're not the boss of me. I'm the boss of me. I'm the captain of my soul. And, I'm going this way forward, not in an aggressive way in any way, but assertively. And it's a liberation to not, when I left Scientology, it was just the wonderful thought that I didn't have to conform my thinking anymore to these ideas, which I at times had difficulty conforming to because they didn't seem to make sense, especially when Hubbard absolutely contradicted himself. That I really did feel a sense of tremendous liberation at that point. I could read books about the brain and not care what anybody else thought about me reading books about the brain, which is, the brain is just a switchboard, according to Hubbard, and we don't need to know anything about it. We know, the mind is a collection of mental image pictures. I always get this, and you've lived for 1.25 quadrillion years, so you've got all of these slides. That's the way I think of it. Millions and trillions of, 24 a second that you're carrying around this big bag, according to his way of looking at things. I don't really look at things that way anymore. And I feel so much more satisfied with who I am, with the relationships I have with other people, and with the life I lead than I ever did, while involved with Scientology. And I see that thankfully, in many other people, and some of them people who left, they're in their 60s when they left a group, and they've nonetheless gone out and found a way of living that is satisfying to them, which they did not have before. Have you got anything else on your little picture that we need to talk about before is there anything you'd like to say or ask before I end this session, as they say in Scientology?
I feel like I'm floating.
Yeah. I have an awful feeling of fear. The colours in the room are brighter. Mu Gum Gai Pan. That's my favourite.
I am now 3 feet behind my own head.
Yeah, that's it.
Yes.
That's the best place to be.
Well, yes.
Nobody can hurt me here.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's everything. I wanted to be able to fill out that picture because so often we get stuck on it's easy to get stuck on the skills side of it because it's the most tangible thing. It's the most immediately usable thing as well.
Yeah.
It's all so practical and so functional, and it doesn't reflect the joy in life that people discover when they start taking back these things that they thought they'd lost forever, or that they thought had been so ruined that they were beyond repair.
Yeah.
And to be able to reclaim it and say, I listened to a piece of music and it made me feel so relaxed that I just didn't worry about what time it was anymore.
Yeah.
And it's such, and to see their joy is a very joyful thing for me. I have to admit it, there is a certain amount of joy that I find in realizing this person has discovered something that I've taken for granted for years and years. The act of listening to music, or in my case, I take great joy in calligraphy. As often as not, I scrunch it up and throw it away. Well, I recycle the paper, of course.
I still have my 40th birthday card that you made for me.
Oh,
and I treasure it. Yeah, that was a long time ago.
It was
25 years ago. Very nearly.
I take great joy in being able to do those simple things, and I don't worry about anything else when I'm doing it. It's just the sheer joy of doing something like that, or the sheer joy of going for a walk. And sometimes I find I will look at a tree and look at the bark of the tree, and something happens, and I'll just notice that that tree bark is more than I usually notice when I walk past the tree. And now, for some reason, I've just stopped and I've looked at it and I've seen the intricacy and the richness of it. And it's just a pleasure just in itself. So naturally, when I see somebody else finding that same joy in whatever it is, it's like, oh, what a wonderful thing that person has found some source of joy like that.
Yeah, and I mean, the ability to lose ourselves in something, to be in the flow, as the guy with the unpronounceable name put it, being in the zone, the just arriving where you are occasionally, which I'm sure is something that meditators wish to achieve, mindfulness practitioners wish to achieve, but the reality is that you have to become yourself, and that a lifetime, from being born, you're actually in a world that's governed by other people and all of these, and the journey is to yourself. And when you get there, you can decide what to do about it, I suppose.
Yeah. So, that's all I really wanted to I just wanted to complete that picture, really.
I think that's the first time, in all of these years when we've attempted to have conversations, first time we've completed anything.
I think you're right, but it all comes down to making a drawing.
Yeah, we'll remember that next time. Well, this has been fantastic. This is my wonderful guest, Christian Shurko, who runs the Dialogue Centre UK and has helped thousands of people over the last 4 decades or so, more than 4 decades now, and been my friend for more than 3 decades, my close friend, and I have no complaints whatsoever. And I will be sending them in, though, if anything does happen to your complaints department, Christian. And I'm still Jon Atack, and we hope to see you again soon. And thank you for your time. And there'll be probably some links below. We are now changing from Spike spending 15 to 20 hours putting little things into the videos so that we can get out the great mass of them. And so there'll be a few things in the links below, possibly worth checking. And Christian and I will talk again soon, hopefully. Thank you very much, Christian.
My pleasure. Thank you.